O aberration, sing your tale of woe to depths where speechless demons go. Rescind tempo reality. Tell the haunting years how ghosts live on in a rear view mirrors. Mike Sauve is a great poet, and from his collection, All the Ghosts That Haunt, I find myself taken by numerous lines, numerous examples of brilliant prose, and just that paragraph I read like there, tempo reality, instead of, that's a word that he's made that's bringing together a reality with a certain tempo, a certain sound, a certain movement. Poetry strikes me as a kind of tempo reality, but also a reality that's sequential, because haunting years don't really fall into an easy sequence, right? They kind of defined all moments. And I like how he took a rear view mirror and kind of put it all together as one word, as if we really cannot break down a rear view mirror. It is a kind of singularity, all of time together in the haunt. And I like also how just looking at that almost looks like kind of William Blake terminology, which this entire poem, "A Ghost Live On in a Rear View Mirrors," makes me think of Ashbery, a concave mirror. But then there's something about this that feels like William Blake. Abscond lensmen with what can't be placed. Kant, K-A-N-T, but can't at the same time. A lovely wordplay. Julian's 11 Days, the Saint Lost to Latent Space. And Julian, I suppose, makes me think of Flaubert, if I'm not mistaken, in Three Tales. And there's a lot of really subtle allusions in this collection that I really enjoy. Bring Your Veil of Elysium. They're just wonderful, wonderful uses of language. But what's very interesting is there's something, for me, Blakeish about this collection. Obviously, with the haunting, we have the hauntology of Derrida, but also techno, something technological, kind of technological Blake seems to come through in these words, because Ariel, I'm just thinking of all of the different characters and mythological structures and symbols that we see in William Blake, and I just kept turning to Blake as I was reading it. It's also before I forget, it's also multimedia. You have images that are in operation. Different fonts are being used at different times to communicate. Different effects. You have some font that's clearly robotic. LLM, large language models, are a theme, which again, like the large language model as God kind of notion, comes through. That is brought together with the entire landscape of literature. And I love this. Lacking a global plan, the large language model splurges tokens from both sides of its malicious mouth, all resulting not only in the pain and anxiety of Troskow's Demerg, doctoring his own dreams in a diachronic adulation of Ifloia sounding like, and he goes on, and forgive for my mispronunciations, but I also like the use of a very elegant and elaborate language that doesn't feel over the top. The beauty of the way it feels as if Mike, when he chose the words, was also very aware of how the words looked on the page, and there's a certain beauty to the words on the page. That also diachronic Trotsky's, there's kind of a play on those together. Like the description also matches the style of the illusion of the artist. It's not just random. And I like also the notion of a global plan with doctoring his own dreams and, making up, but also doctoring is an interesting word, isn't it? Because healing, his demerog, so sort of a demon, but doctoring. So does the demon heal or is the demon fake? There's some interesting uses of words that suggest multiple meanings at the same time. On the demonstration record, the large language model dynamically adjusts. And I like how he made dynamically adjust in a different font, because that makes the poem dynamic. And adjust the font, dynamically adjust. The responsoral balanced to restructure a message in which meaning is amended only to be apprehended at the end again. That's really great. And it is kind of like that. That's the way the large language model thinks, right? It's suggesting a way that it thinks, which suggests, does the human do the same, or does the human think in the midst of, in the middle? That's left to us to decide. The poem incorporates different symbols that, again, there's this sort of feeling as you read the poems of this haunting of the computer. That it's trying to break through here with a symbol, the dot, the arrows, here with a different font. There's this haunting presence of the technology that is breaking through here and there, which, you know, is kind of like the illusion in general, right? You know, if you use an illusion, there's you know, there's something that's beyond the text that is breaking through the text, suggested by a single word, and there is something about the presence of the AI or the technology that's almost breaking through, like illusions in literature. And it just makes me think of something like Finnegan's Wake or Ulysses in its heavy illusions is in fact doing something like an AI unit, suggesting something beyond itself. But whereas maybe in Joyce, what is suggested beyond the text is actually there, in the large language model, there's just a black box, which perhaps is nothing, or perhaps the ultimate saturation of meaning. You know, one has to decide these things. But there's, you know, there are other examples. So they'll lens and steal, but they'll know it's Ariel. And I believe that's in the same, that word Ariel, Ariel, is in the same font as the word, which is brilliant. Frenziing funds to fleece their believing in the illness will extend. The hour Charlemagne begins, power's hegemonic condescension. Which again, just beautiful word plays, beautiful word uses, and please forgive my mispronunciations. A good reason to pick up the text and go read it yourself, to see how he is using language to really bring you into the text. And it does also feel as if there's a certain mystery here that you're trying to work through, and to work in, to put the symbols together. And that is kind of like a poem is, right? Trying to figure out how it all goes together. And you could say AI is trying to figure out how it all goes together. Sitting on the sand, eating salmon from a paper plate, watching the canoe races. That's how I spent a year, managing the RCPM's media relations, channeling the cases of the missing and the murdered indigenous women, which we considered a bit better than nothing here in the missing and murdered spear. That's a stunning line. And he's got a picture of the indigenous women who have been murdered, which makes me think of the novel 2666, that incredible tale. That's an incredible novel, and I was thinking about that while going through this poem. And there's something so interesting about that, about watching canoes, and as you're doing it, you're also somewhere else on a screen, this beautiful image. But you're also going through, you know, data, and then there are women. These are real murders that have turned into data. Is this another murder? Is this another kind of missing murder? Because the women are missing online, right? They're like missing from the scene, and yet they're also there. There's a certain interconnectivity that is all here, and yet at the same time, that interconnectivity is odd. There's an oddity to it. And then he has this one on the bus that kind of brought to mind similar sentiments, similar thoughts. And Sola Surplus, I love that title. They were just brilliant plays. Tonight's theme is simply schemas. You are my sunshine into shafts of vacant minds, wandering accidentally like a martyr into the black space, only least in waste and time, out of mind squanderings, all the abandoned love, all the golden hours, wondering how can moments glow so swiftly. It's beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. And it continues to go. And again, I also really enjoyed the collection. Kind of thematically in its style made me think of Mike's other book, who authored the John Titor Legend. And I've always found this fascinating, this gentleman who claims to have time traveled and seems to have had knowledge that's just unbelievable he had. And Mike does a really fascinating job of investigating the story, going into details, putting the case. And the book itself was in a style that reminded me of the early internet. The fonts, the way the book is structured, the way it's almost like interviews, but it's like chat logs. I just loved the book as an artistic undertaking that brought me back to the early internet, and how that felt fitting for the subject material, where he investigates the John Titor legend. And if you're not familiar with that, pick up the book. You can also look it up. It's truly fascinating, and it's something I think about a lot with The Map is Indestructible, with the question of internally consistent systems and how do you know what's true, how do you know what's false. And I appreciated as well how both of these books thematically crossed. They felt There's a certain, in Mike's work that I've read, a certain holding an open hand to that which is hard to believe. It would be easier to close the hand and say it's impossible, but Mike brings you all the way where he's done rigorous investigation to earn his open hand. It's not like he's just taken the Titor Legend and gone, the John Titor Legend and gone, I want it to be true. He's really worked to earn his position, because he leaves quote-unquote scenario 4 open at the end. And you can't dismiss it entirely, even after all the investigation, which of course begs the question, what are we doing when we think and investigate if at the end of the day we find ourselves in the place of our beginnings, but as Eliot said, we know it for the first time. Not all open hands are the same, and the earned open hand is different from the hand that just stayed open out of its own wants. And there's something about the haunting that the poems of Mike suggest that also suggests there's something lurking that cannot be entirely dismissed, and yet that we must try to dismiss it in a sense. We must try to compute it. The only way to earn the undismissible is to do the work of trying to dismiss it. But that requires working hard. That requires really trying to bring the idea to the text and to bring it together into its fullness. Lost to the outsidedness of the eschatological imperative, you will need to read only Finnegan's Wake. I love that, because that gets a lot, right? Like, okay, all you have to do in this life to really get at it is to read Finnegan's Wake, as if that is not in it. I think there's a reading group in California that has been reading Finnegan's Wake nonstop for like 20 years. And, it ended that once they get to the end of the book, they just start again, because there is no other book. There's just Finnegan's Wake, and there's just the doing it again and again. And in that again and again, one returns and finds the return is never a repetition, that there's always a creative excess, as Deleuze would point to, and I think Hegel as well. There is always something in excess of the return. There's always something in excess of the investigation and the calculation and the prose. But that's precisely what makes prose worth attempting. And Mike has attempted very well and succeeded at creating 2 beautiful books that I highly suggest for Mike's work. You can find it on Amazon. You can learn about his work on his own personal pages. And thank you so much for your time.